Before I was born, my parents had a daughter. Unfortunately, she passed away while she was very young, while my mom was expecting me. From that moment on, my mom was wrapped in deep grief and could not find the strength to move on. In such a difficult situation, my father had to invest a lot of energy to help me as a child. The relationship with my mom was strained throughout my growing up. I constantly heard stories about my late sister, who I never got to know. Every anniversary of my sister's birthday, as well as the day my mom found out she was pregnant, she would go into deep mourning. On those days, she would pick me up from school and we couldn't do anything. On the days we didn't celebrate Christmas, my mom would say that without her, the holiday had no meaning. If I expressed a desire to celebrate my birthday, Mom reacted violently. She would throw parties and hang pictures of my sister all over the house and yard for all the guests to see. She convinced me that in this way we were inviting my sister to my celebrations. When friends came over, my mom would continuously talk about my sister, which made their overstaying awkward. When I was a teenager and started dating my future wife, I tried to keep her away from my mom. At their first meeting, my mom again only talked about my sister, showed her baby pictures and home videos, ignoring everything else. My wife asked about my childhood and wanted to see pictures of me, but my mom couldn't stop talking about her daughter. When I left home, our relationship with my mom deteriorated even more. I decided not to stop living life to the fullest during those 3 days we used to grieve. I also started celebrating Christmas. My mom was so angry that she yelled at me on the phone, accusing me of indifference to my sister's death. She said I was a monster for being able to act normal on days when others were grieving and find joy in Christmas. We didn't communicate much over the years until one day she called me. In that conversation, I told her that she needed help because I couldn't continue to live like this. I felt like I meant nothing to her. She apologized and promised to get better. Recently, my wife and I were expecting a daughter. Mom excitedly stated that she couldn't wait to meet baby Ella, which was my deceased sister's name. I explained that we had not chosen that name. Mom became alarmed and stated that I was obligated to name my daughter after my sister, claiming that Ella deserved to be honored and remembered. I asked her to stop, but she insisted and even wanted to tell my wife the same thing. I replied that I would never name my daughter after my sister after her reaction to my refusal to use the name Ella. I regretted reconnecting with my mom because she would never stop making everything about this loss the center of the universe. My mom called me an evil idiot for my desire to forget my sister, believing I had no love for her. Now that's really not easy when your whole life is spent in the shadow of your mom's grief for her daughter. It's too bad she didn't get to fully enjoy being your mom. You are absolutely not an idiot. This is your daughter and your wife, and only the two of you have the right to choose her name. The fact that your mom assumed the girl would be named Ella and then reacted so violently to the other choice only confirms that she hasn't changed. Best to keep your distance for your peace of mind. Congratulations to you and your wife. You seem to be on the verge of cutting off contact with your mom. The likelihood of her allowing her to spend time alone with the baby is extremely slim. She may get her daughter's things out of the attic and insist that you take them. That dress Ella came home in from the hospital should be worn by your Ella. This is Ella's first word, her favorite toy. All of these things she thinks should be a part of your daughter's life. Any mention that your daughter is not an outgrowth of your sister can drive her to extremes. It's unbearable for a young child who doesn't understand why grandma yells at him just because he said he likes dogs more than cats. Can you imagine what would happen if your mom started to really believe that this child was actually her daughter? It could cause her condition to deteriorate further. I'm sorry you grew up in Ella's shadow. It's also unclear if your mom ever sought therapy to help with her grief. I'm sorry you couldn't fully be yourself and celebrate because Ella died. That must have been very hard. Your mom has to work through her grief on her own. Next story. My wife works in a college dormitory. If students have problems with accommodation or other issues, they go to her. She doesn't think much about these problems. Because of her job, we can afford to pay for groceries. In fact, we would save more if she stayed home and didn't put our youngest child in daycare. So all other expenses are on me. We have a nice house and are firmly rooted in our neighborhood. I have a good job and am moving up in my career. The problem started when my wife wanted to change jobs. This was fine with me as she was not happy with her current position. However, Things changed when she applied to another school located in another state. She received an offer that would allow her to move up the ladder. Despite the possible promotion, it would have been a far cry from the income I have now. She told me of her desire to accept the offer. I replied to her that it was a terrible idea. This provoked an argument. We argued and she argued that my job was more important. I responded by saying that yes, my job is more important than her job because it is what allows us to maintain our standard of living. She called me an idiot and hasn't spoken to me since. If we move, I won't be able to find a job for a while. You're not an idiot. She is looking to move her family and affect your job in an effort to move up the career ladder, even though her current position is low paying. This decision may not be a good one, both financially and career-wise. It is important to evaluate the cost-effectiveness of a possible job change for both of you. I would recommend that she change fields to something with higher pay and better job prospects, such as nursing or programming. She currently has a job and would probably be satisfied if she chose a career in another field. You're right in wanting to keep your good job, since you've been working there for a long time. From the way you describe it, it would be unfair to lose that because of her job. However, it sounds like you need to improve your communication. There is probably a compromise that will allow you to keep your career and her to feel supported and fulfilled. In my opinion, all parties are acting rashly. Your wife should not expect you to quit your job. However, it is also unacceptable for you to completely ignore her aspirations. Instead of asserting your superiority, it is better to discuss the underlying issues and find common ground. I think your wife's suggestion is unrealistic. I can't understand that level of selfishness and lack of a realistic view of the situation. If there are no jobs in the place she wants to move to, this should have been seriously discussed before applying and planning the move. Selling your property and moving without financial gain seems unreasonable. Now I want to tell a different story. I, a 33-year-old woman, recently married my husband of 30 years. Together we traveled to Mexico for our honeymoon, taking a 3-hour flight. I fly quite often for work, having earned many bonus miles. Unlike me, my husband isn't particularly fond of flying, but he gets by, especially when he can hold my hand and close my eyes during takeoff and landing. When I booked my tickets, I asked to use my miles for a possible upgrade to business class, but only if 2 seats were available. Then we pretty much forgot about it until the day of our flight. I was full of anticipation for the trip and checked in online. Everything went smoothly until we boarded, where we were stopped by an employee scanning boarding passes. She informed us that my husband had been upgraded to business class, but only him. I immediately responded that this was unacceptable as we were on our honeymoon and wanted to stay together. My husband suddenly intervened, saying it was fine, and went to business class. I was shocked at his decision, as he knew I had flown business class often and he had not, and felt he deserved the experience. I felt the hold we were all getting in line and decided not to argue and just take my seat. As I headed to my seat, I felt resentful. My husband took his seat in business class, smiling, while I had to sit next to an elderly woman with a baby on her lap. After a few minutes of trying to hold back tears, I realized that my husband had used my miles for an upgrade, leaving me alone on a wedding flight. An hour after takeoff, he approached me at the back of the plane, offered me half of his breakfast from business class, and asked why I was ignoring him. He was scared and needed my support, knowing how experienced I was with flying. I replied to him, "Maybe you should have thought about that before you left me alone, before our honeymoon even started." He got angry and stated that this might be the only time he would ever have the opportunity to fly business class. He added that he shared his breakfast with me as compensation and that I could at least support him in his genuine fear of flying. I rolled my eyes and said sarcastically, "Thank you." He returned to his seat. When we landed, I tried to move forward and forget what had happened so we could enjoy our honeymoon. However, he still felt resentful that I didn't reassure him with a text message before takeoff. Now I wondered if I was being unreasonable. Maybe I really should have let him enjoy his time in business class and reassured him that everything would be okay. It's not your fault. Your husband made a really questionable decision that he had to live with. He jumped at the chance to sit alone in business class. It doesn't seem to have occurred to him how obviously he was violating your shared space on the flight, despite his phobia. He is a grown man who apparently had a great experience on takeoff. If he really needed your help, He wouldn't have asked for it after his food had already been served. It looks like he used his need for you as a weapon to make you feel obligated to forgive him for a rather inappropriate choice. After all, this is your honeymoon, and it was supposed to be a time for both of you, which is why his behavior is so annoying. He complains, trying to dodge responsibility for his selfish act. This may be my only chance, he says, but there's a time and place for everything, and your honeymoon is definitely not the time for a selfie. I'm so scared, how can you be mad at me? He asks. It's all about him, and this is just the beginning of your marriage. How will this affect the rest of your life together? If he is so selfish and incapable of showing common sense and understanding, you will face many more moments like this in the months and years to come. My next story. My wife, unfortunately, does not have the skills to take care of things. She tends to purchase inexpensive items that she replaces when they break or wear out. In contrast, I prefer to buy the highest quality items as my budget allows. This difference in approach was known to me even before our marriage. I honestly expressed my concerns about the safety of my items and asked her not to use them. Initially, things were going well. However, things changed when her dollar store pans started sticking due to her use of metal objects. As a result, she took my Williams-Sonoma skillet and severely scratched its ceramic coating. I was forced to replace it. A similar situation happened again with my laptop, which she also accidentally damaged. We recently calculated our tax refund, and each of us took a portion of the amount and put the rest in a joint account. She was surprised to find out how much money was left over. I reminded her that I have to replace damaged items, to which she replied that the $200 cost of a frying pan seemed ridiculous to her. When I asked what would be an adequate amount, she said about $10. A week went by and she was being passive-aggressive, using only her pots and pans and cooking unpalatable food. When she took my Youre skillet to cook dinner for her parents, I sent her a link to the website so she could see how much it would cost to replace it. I don't plan on getting divorced, but it's important to me that she take care of my stuff or replace it if it gets damaged. She thinks I am petty and picky. You value quality and thriftiness, whereas she favors cheap goods and convenience. Don't worry, your stuff will last you for years. You'll have to replace it repeatedly. The environmental consequences of such purchases are significant. After all that garbage is generated because she thinks things are disposable. She can end up spending a lot more money to replace the same item. You call her an idiot, but I realize you don't want a divorce. However, how are you going to bridge the value gap between you? I wish you luck. I hope she can learn from you. Why was he paying from the joint account? He didn't damage the property he paid for. She did the damage and should be held financially responsible. I suggest that in the future she cover the damage from her own account. What's the point of marriage if you have separate pots and pans and don't agree on anything? I don't like the way she cooks. Don't trust her. Yes, you are unhappy in your marriage. She's not going to pay from her account even though that would be the fairest thing to do. They'll have to use their joint account, so she'll cover some of the damage. My inner psychic says she may divorce him because she likes to throw away everything of value and doesn't value anything. Her reasoning is that he is too picky and keeps score, a story that really surprised me. My parents divorced when I was 7 years old. Initially, my father came to see me every week. However, by the time I was 10, his visits became less frequent and he only came once a month. Yesterday, the day my cat who had been with me since childhood was put to sleep, was also the day of my father's wedding. I warned him in advance that I would not be able to attend as I needed to stay with the cat in her final moments. He reacted strongly to my refusal, arguing that I should not favor an animal over my participation in his wedding. I reminded him that this was his 4th marriage and I had been present at the previous 2. This provoked his anger and yelling, after which I decided to hang up. This morning he expressed his disappointment and I replied that I didn't want to see him again if he continued this behavior. He reminded me of my rights to see him, but I pointed out that I turned 18 6 months ago and he shouldn't come over if he cares so little for me that he can't even remember my birthday date. My half-sister tried to talk me out of being so hard on my father, claiming it wouldn't solve the problem. You're not an idiot, although you could have picked a different day to put the cat to sleep. After all, this is your father's 4th wedding. At some point you did your duty. He's probably scared and angry because you're an adult now and can just cut off contact with him if you wish. Perhaps you could have chosen a different day. No, I'm really sorry about your cat. I don't think we need to talk about it, but don't let anyone convince you that it would have been better to leave your cat to suffer longer for the sake of your father's fourth wedding. It seems the cat has been around longer than the fourth wife. Your father didn't find time to visit you, but he found it for 2 failed marriages. Now, on to the next thing. Since your parents divorced, he's made it clear what his priorities are. He's selfish and being a father was a secondary thought for him. I'm sorry you have a father like that. Your sister may need more time to realize that about him. Seeing your parents' faults is harder when you're young.